Well, unavoidably, we begin the show on a very solemn note, as the Niger State Emergency Management Agency has disclosed that 151 bodies have so far been recovered from the deadly floods that swept Tifin Maza and Ungwan Hawusawa communities in Mokwa local government area of the state. A dashboard released by the agency shows that 11 persons sustained various degrees of injury, while 3,018 persons have been displaced. According to the agency, the floods destroyed 265 houses, impacting 503 households in 3 communities. It is also reported that 2 roads and 2 bridges were washed away by the flood.
Meanwhile, a federal government delegation has then paid a sympathy visit to the government and people of Niger State over the monumental disaster. The Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, led this delegation, receiving the Governor, Mohammed Bago, appreciated President Bola Tinubu for sending the delegation to sympathize with the state, especially the people of Mokwa, over the flood disaster. Now, represented by his deputy, Yakubu Garba, the governor said the incident has left the state shocked and distressed. He said efforts are being intensified to ensure the construction of drainage systems in Mokwa, Mashegu council areas. The governor also disclosed that the state government has provided humanitarian assistance to the victims, including 6,000 bags of rice. Minister of Information and National Orientation Mohammed Idris also extended the condolences of President Tinubu and all members of the Federal Executive Council, adding that the president has directed all available resources of the federal government be deployed to address the situation, and that efforts are being made to avert or mitigate recurring flood disasters in the country.
The National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, has had an on-the-spot assessment already of the situation as soon as it happened in Mokwa. We are also aware that they have been collaborating with the state government to ensure that those who have lost their lives, the bodies are respectfully recovered. Those who have been injured or have sustained various degrees of injuries are attended to, and every requirement that government needs to put together has been put to ensure that succor is being provided for those, our brothers and sisters in Mokwa.
We focus on key areas of need, like the livelihood of people, how to restore dignity for them again, and also people who are displaced and have no home, where we can provide some durable solution for them.
I thank Mr. President and the Honorable Ministers for acting swiftly to help Niger State. That shows that we have a responsive government from the federal government to the states and even the local governments. At the moment, about 3,018 persons has been displaced. The households affected are 503 and still counting. 11 persons were found injured and are receiving medication in different hospitals within the Mokwa town.
Well, as we continue to explore all possible angles to that unfortunate disaster, we're now being joined here by Martins Olamide, who's the Associate Director, Climate Change at Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. Good morning. Good to have you join us on the morning show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you know that Mokwa, if not the entire Niger State, has been in mourning since Wednesday, given the disaster yet again, that happened there. The lowest end of the figure would be about 151 that we have reported, but a few officials have said that it could be as high as 200, if not more. Many displaced, many houses in ruins. What are your thoughts in terms of assessing, that disaster? Do you think it is something that could have been prevented? And what do you say to the response so far from both the federal and the state government? We understand that 6,000 bags of rice have been given, and like somebody has said, before, anything happens in Nigeria, rice. Disaster, rice. Poverty, rice. Again, 6,000 bags of rice to Niger State. What are your thoughts on this unfortunate incident?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. And I must start by saying sincere condolences to the families that lost loved ones in Niger State. Just to answer your question straight on, it's unfortunate that we have to come to this table to repeat the same story over and over again. As a matter of fact, climate emergencies, just like the case of flooding, is not something unexpected. Climate change is real, and that's been established by science over the years. So I'm quite surprised that government response will still be reduced to reactionary, if I may use that. Government keep reacting to, issues that they ought to be proactive about. Year in, year out, we've seen agencies of government releasing out data, warning people about the imminent, disaster that will happen every year, but nothing has always been done. This is just an example of, let's say, government ineptitude, to addressing climate challenges as we have in the case of flooding in Niger State. So we regret this incident because it's becoming, year in, year out, and like you also said, funnily, government think that when they address emergencies like this by giving out palliatives, the whole story is settled, but it's not settled. We're talking about people here who have suffered both economic and non-economic losses. I don't know how compensation looks like for families that have lost loved ones. I don't know how recovery looks like for those who have lost their ancestral homes and land. I don't know how they're going to bounce back. It appears to me that the system has failed them, and the system seems to be failing the people year in, year out without any concrete policy addressing this from the side of government.
Now, you see, Nigeria thrives in sectors. That's what I would say. There's sectors where it seems like there's so much progress happening, and you can have literally extreme ends of extreme success and extreme disappointment, right? This is a clear example of extreme disappointment. Now, as a climate expert, looking at the overview of Niger State, how would you assess the environment, the landscape, the drainage systems, the government's expenditure as it pertains to making sure that there are proper drainage systems, the roads are well built, people are also sensitized on the possible, effects and pending problems like this? Because I know that there's a way to check when something like this is about to happen. Are people made aware of it? So how would you assess all of this?
I think Niger State is not exempted from the Nigerian reality. I think we are trying to do the cash-off game here. When it comes to being proactive with our planning system and in the way we structure our city, let me also say that there are two categories to this issue. We have the climate science that has defined flooding over the years, and we have the social, environmental, maybe the political angle, to defining why we are here. It's settled that the glacier is melting, and either we like it or not, we have increased water in the ocean body that is causing sea level rise, and of course, rainwater to the system. But then there's a failure of government to also establish dam, that should accommodate these excesses. And like I did mention, Niger State is just an example of the Nigerian state. I don't know, if there's any policy that speaks to how urbanization should look like, in Niger State. Just like we have in Nigeria, there's no proactive measure that should, encourage drainage, cleanage, and of course the clearing of drainages and all that. And I don't also know the level of involvement that the people have into this, because this incident happened 3 a.m. overnight. And this is not the first time it's happening in Niger State. And we have to establish that. Yeah. But it caught the system, the people almost unaware. And then there was a collapse of a dam that should absorb these excesses. But then what is the strength of the dam that collapsed? So I think it's a system, that have failed to accommodate the emerging reality, and of course the people continue to suffer. So there is no proactiveness when it comes to planning how a city should look like, accommodating, the signs that have established flooding to happen over time. And I think it's high time that we begin to have a dialogue as to how community intervention should look like, being buttressed or leveraged by, policy assistance and all that.
Yeah, I like that point, policy existence, and which is really what the government should be looking at, policy that speaks to urban planning. I know that you are part of, a CSO. There's a new movement. You are part of a movement with about 40 civil organizations that came together to talk about environmental change and all of that. I'd like to know, the primary goal of this movement, first of all, and also I'd like for you to speak to You know, we've touched on recovery, we've touched on people that have lost their ancestral lands. I'd like for you to speak to the issue of food insecurity. We know that, you know, Niger State is known for its vast arable land, and the Niger State Governor, Umar Bago, has been positioning the state as the agricultural hub for Nigeria. What is the impact of such an environmental disaster on, you know, food insecurity in Niger State?
Thank you very much. Yes, we belong to the climate justice movement. About 40 of us came together, and this was part of the reason why we had to, form the alliance. I mean, climate change is here and is real, and like I did mention, it has been established. So we think there is need for government to put its house in order. Year in, year out, we go to conference of parties almost beggarly and asking for charity. And there's a question, about statutory internal provision, budgetary internal provision that should address emergencies like this. Like Kashi mentioned, we've established some progress in some aspects, but progress is not progress when it's not holistic and when it doesn't speak to the hearts, of the people. So we think that there is need for proactive measures. So we are forcing dialogue on government, in a way that they begin to prioritize climate exigencies. We are actually in existential crisis as we speak, and I don't know how recovery actually looks like. So what we do in that movement is to begin to prevail on government at the local, subnational, and of course the national level, to see how government can prioritize the existence of its people. The primary duty of government is the social welfare of its people. Anything short of that is a failure, of the government. And then the other part of your question is quite disheartening that, the state that continues to pride itself as the food basket of the nation is a big blow on us. And we're also worried about food security, and not just that, even food sovereignty. On the other side, we have seen the inglorious attempt of corporations to take over our food system, and now having to marry this with climate exigencies and, of course, flooding is a big blow on the state that continues to also struggle, to find its feet among the community of nations. So our being giant of Africa will only reflect the strength of our policy, and our policies will speak to the needs of the people who are the frontline communities. It's going to be a big blow if next year again we come up here and say the same story. Government policy, like I did mention, should not just be reactionary or reactive, but should be proactive, to solving this crisis like we have them now.
All right, well submitted. And I like the fact that you made reference to urban planning challenge that we have all over Nigeria, not just Niger State. The governor of Anambra State alluded to that when the president visited. Lagos is battling with, many aspects, erosion in many of our states. Where do you think the blame should lie in terms of the failure, repeatedly, in terms of urban planning, in terms of not addressing core issues of erosion, core issues of planning? If you look at, the images we've seen in Mokwa local government in Niger State, many of the houses were built on river channel. There is the poverty component to it. There's the failure of government. And we are talking about a state with the largest land mass in Nigeria. And therefore, land cannot be the issue here, either for farming or for housing, if proper planning is there. Where do you lay the blame? What would be your key words of advice to the state government, to the federal government, and to agencies that are supposed to be in charge of things like this nationally?
Yeah, I think the blame we have to go around, but the buck will go to the government, for a line itself, not to perform its responsibility. I sense some level of oversight, neglect here. People have the tendency to want to disregard existing legislations or policies, but it's still the duty of government to enforce those policies. I can't, imagine myself building on areas that have been demarcated for flooding, flood zone or the case may be. So I think it's the government, basically that needs to do what it's supposed to do, the needful, as we always say it. And of course the people as well. Now when issues like this happen, the governor is in Mina, they were talking about Mokwa here. The people bears the brunt at the frontline community. So there's supposed to be some level of conscientization or sensitization at the local level to see that when emergencies happen like this, the people in these frontline communities bears the biggest brunt. So some level of responsibility, and social obligation is expected, from the side of the local. And let me also say that everything should not be reduced to politics. You know, the reason why policies of government don't work is because of politics. You know, people look at the political interest in enforcing government policy. But of course, social welfare exceeds politics. So government should be more proactive, you know, to ensuring that its policies work, you know, disregarding the intrigues and the interests of policies, politics as the case may be. So straight on, the blame goes round. You know, the people continue to, you know, to build and, you know, lay structures along flood zone, and government who has failed consistently, you know, to enforce its own provision. Because like I did mention, this thing happened almost every other year. So we expect some level of intervention that will be more sustainable, you know, on the part of government.
But do the people know where to build? Is there, because I think for me, it still goes back to the sensitization. This is not the first time that the flood is happening. It happened in Rivers State a couple of weeks ago as well. We've also seen in Kwara. So there's an awareness that this happens and this happens often. Now, at the time, we all spoke about sensitization. How do we, because you just said it happened at 3 a.m. So obviously the people it came like a thief in the night, you know, for lack of a better explanation. But again, I'm going back to prior information. Was that available? Is there any kind of, and I know there is, but I'm just asking to be extra sure. Is there any kind of mechanism that lets people know, okay, there is a possibility that at this time...
Meteorologically speaking.
Exactly. At this time, in a week, in 2 weeks, we're expecting to see XYZ happening. So people should prepare. Evacuate your homes, for instance. Leave your homes. Take your belongings. Do not come back. You know, proper does that, because
mechanism.
If we keep on just saying, oh, you know, the government, people have built their houses, the houses have been built, there's nothing that can be done about that. Some of those houses were built decades ago. You understand? As for government policies, 2 more years down the line for this tenure to be done, we'll now start explaining policies to a new governor. So I feel like these issues are dated and they're textbook. Let's talk about the people. Why were they not made aware? You know, what can we do to make sure that they are aware? Are there agencies that are to ensure that things like this do not happen by sudden, emergencies? It should not be an emergency.
Yeah, I think every year we do release, you know, weather forecast. We have an agency, Nigeria Meteorological Services Agency, NIMET.
Yes.
Yeah, but then the issue we have with some of this data is the language. You know, how relatable are the language, you know, that these guys comes up with almost every other year. Data are being reeled out, you know, even to state government. But then state government, you know, have the obligation to demystify some of this language in the way that an average local person in Mokwa, in my own village in Ikole Ekiti, for instance, will be able to understand and then have clearly the understanding of what should be done. So this data exists. We have agencies saddled with this responsibility. But how empowered, you know, they are to demystify the languages in a way that becomes more relatable is another conversation that we need to have. And also, I think there's also need for subnational, you know. Now we have emphasis on SEMA. SEMA is an agency that provides intervention after an emergency. You know, SEMA manages the outcome of emergencies. SEMA don't prevent emergency. We have to get this, you know, very, very clearly in our understanding. We have agencies that release data that ought to prevent emergencies from occurring, not the ones that empower, you know, interventions post-emergency. So we have to create this synergy between our government agencies. And of course, the sync also needs to exist between data coming from the national and that which with the subnational works with. I give you an instance in Ekiti State where I come from, or even in Lagos here. I don't know the level of interaction that exists between emergency, you know, agencies of government at, you know, both levels of government. Is this something that the state government is also aware of? And what is the measure, you know, of input that the state government is putting to absorb some of these imminent, you know, crises that NIMET and, of course, NISA will always predict year in, year out. So I think there's supposed to be some synergy, you know, across board, and speaking the language of these, you know, warnings or cautions in a way that an average person will know what's expected to do and what not to do, you know, when these emergencies eventually happen.
Yeah, sensitization within the community. I mean, that's really key because these agencies, I believe they have been proactive, NEMA especially, as well as NIMET, in providing information, but they need to, you know, go into these communities. Martins, Olamide, we're going to go on a short break now. And when we come back, the morning show will continue. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show. Still in the studio with us is Martins Olamide, Associate Director, Climate Change at Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. Thank you for staying with us. Before we went on a break there, we were talking about, sensitization of the communities and what more agencies can do to make sure that they are able to communicate with these communities to prevent, ahead of these disasters. We've seen this, like you said, this sort of disaster reoccur. Just back in August 2023, I believe they say 15 communities were affected in Mokwa local government. Again, alone, 15 communities. This time around, we see it's 3 communities, 503 households have been impacted so far, 3,000 people displaced. Now, speaking about climate change, because, you are an advocate for that, I would like to know what key environmental protection measures that need to be implemented, especially to prevent these sort of disasters. And what can these communities do? What do they need to know about climate change and, in furtherance to helping the government prevent such tragedies in the future?
Yeah, thank you very much. So before climate change became, this popular, local communities have always devised means to exist. Corporations came, and there were distortion to, local livelihoods and, of course, local lifestyle. To answer your question, we have to go back, to leveraging some of those systems that have prevented, exigencies like this to affect local communities. They have local adaptation measures that government needs to listen to. Many a time we've seen our government policies in trying to solve climate crisis, as top, in its approach, not bottom up as the case may be. For instance, adaptation measures are not supposed to be forced on local communities. These communities over the years know how to survive, and they've always been surviving, even when seasonal changes occur and there were variation in weather pattern. So we have to have conversation with the locals as to what grows in their community, for instance, what mitigates, climate crisis in their community, for instance, and how can these concerns be aggregated into policy documents, that will begin to advance their interests the more. In a nutshell, climate change, either we like it or not, is happening, but there are some triggers. And we have to look at the root cause of this flooding, for instance. Like I did mention, the glacier is melting. And why is it melting? Extractivism, reckless extractivism, oil and gas flare, destroying the ozone layer and making the water body to get more water and releasing this water body to dams that are not existing. So when we try to solve this crisis, we have to, be very, very professional in solving it. We have to reduce extractivism at all costs. By the time we tear the heart apart and then we get oil from the ground, so to say, there's a way this gets to the atmosphere and destroys the ozone layer. And we have more water that we don't have the capacity to manage. And that is the root cause of this whole issue. So why this is happening in one side, we should also have a sustained conversation with the locals who have always and consistently developed methods that they have always been adapting with. This conversation needs to happen and needs to happen fast. When you look at the Global Adaptation Plan or the Niger Adaptation Plan, for instance, these are foreign suggestions that don't convey the concerns of the realities of the frontline community. Is Nigeria taking the bus to get the applause and the appease of, the global audience? And the local people are suffering, So we should go in-house and have this one-on-one conversation. How is Mokwa existing before now? And how can they exist the more, leveraging their local strategies? And that is the best way to solving climate crisis. It's not something too difficult. By the time you are imposing things that don't work or don't relate with the locals, then you are creating more gaps in the system, and that will not help us.
I like the submission about, going back, if you like, to the roots, to engage with the locals, how they've been fixing things. It is not everything that yes, technology works well and everything, but it's not every time that we jump on buzzwords, like a minister recently was saying, they will use AI to identify poor people. Maybe in a few days' time, we'll also hear that they will use AI to know where flooding will happen. So it is important, like you said, for government to go back to the drawing board and to the basics and work with the locals who have always tackled these problems ab initio. But my question to you will be, do we have a clear idea of the expectations for this year, or shall we say for the second half of the year in terms of what to expect. The World Meteorological Organization said in its latest report, a global climate report, that communities in poor countries or struggling countries tend to lose between 2 to 5% of their GDP because of climate crisis. Of course, Nigeria falls within that. What is the outlook, therefore, and how can we begin to work towards near permanent solutions? I get the point that there may not be permanent solutions when it comes to natural disasters, but there could be near permanent solutions. What will those be, and what is the outlook for the remainder of the year?
Our outlook will likely depend on, the response of government. It is our duty to, like I said earlier, to force dialogue on government or to prevail on government. First, we'll continue to play our part trying to sensitize the locals as to what could be done. Let me say, last year we were in Kenya, Taita Taveta, and we saw something like this. In Kenya, we saw people who were originally farmers now have to become emergency miners because they were trying to survive because of climate change. And what the Kenyan government did then was to create a conversation, a convergence between state and non-state actors and trying to fix things. I think that same could also be replicated here in Nigeria. Like I did mention earlier, we expect some level of serious interaction between the agencies of government, not excluding people from the frontline communities, because these are supposed to be beneficiaries of government policies. So when they are excluded from the process, we can conveniently say that the policy outcome will not, speak to their concern. Moving forward, we expect that there's supposed to be some level of interaction between those agencies and the tiers of government. Nigeria is divided into 36 states plus Abuja. So Nigeria is not Abuja. So we have, for instance, Niger State is not Abuja. And we don't have to move all the parapherias, the instrumentalities of government from Abuja to Niger State to fix an emergency. I mean, subnationals should not be incapacitated to fixing climate crisis, in their own domain. And let me also say that I think there's high time for us to begin to be, more proactive in putting statutory budgetary provisions into climate adaptation and mitigation. I acknowledge the fact that there are historical liabilities that need to be paid.
WMO, by the way, identified that part of the problem is the diversion of funds meant for, climate crisis, and that it is endemic in many countries of Africa.
Yeah.
It's very endemic.
Last year, one of the outcome of COP, 2029 in Baku was, we, the societies, asked for about $5 trillion to fixing, historical liabilities.
Yes.
But then there's a question about in-house contribution. Now you say, I'm owing you something. What are you also putting to the table? How are you promising me that you won't, contribute more to the crisis? So while we are asking for those monies to be paid, we are also forcing government to, people are making money for financial allowances, for government officials. They could also vote money for adaptation plans, mitigation plans, and of course, climate action within the country that can fix. We have the example of the ecological fund.
Yes.
There's need for us to also begin to devote resources. And these resources have to be managed by interests that are political, not those who would, of course, return the money back to avenues and then the money develop wings and fly away.
That's an interesting one. Well, I do want you to expand on the climate angle, because you did speak about how oil and gas, the gas flaring, we know that NEPRC has a plan to commercialize that and hopefully end that by the year 2025. We're not sure when, but basically we direct gas flaring to specific sites. I'm not sure how they plan to do it just yet, but oil and gas, as you already know, is Nigeria's biggest source of revenue as we speak, while we're trying to diversify the economy to make sure that other sectors like agriculture also begin to offer as much revenue. How would you say we can balance these two issues out? Dealing with climate change and our over-reliance or dependence on oil?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Just yesterday I read, though I've not confirmed it to be true anyway, that the trains in Germany are now hydrogen dependent fully, 100%. What they exhaust now is water, not emission anymore. We can also get there. We know we might need to transit to that process or to that level using our oil and gas, but then we have to commit, into this, more seriously as a nation. We have seen the government, and I mean no disrespect, who speaks from both sides of the mouth. For instance, the National Climate Change Act says by 2060, would have achieved net zero. And the same government is making huge investments in oil and gas. You know, where are we heading to? You know, what are we saying?
That's the thing, because don't you think, that's why I said, it's a, like, you know, it's two prongs of an issue.
Yeah.
Overdependence versus our desire to deal with climate change. What's our reality?
Yeah, but then if we take our mind back to the era of COVID-19, I mean, we saw our oil and gas, you know, became stranded in the international market. So there's a time value even to this oil and gas. Countries that buys oil and gas from us are considering alternatives, you know, in making use of this. Yeah, so I think the investment we should be making now, we are not short of renewable energy options in Nigeria. I mean, we have solar, we have wind, we have water, we have virtually everything that can aid our diversification as a people. What we need is the sincerity of government, you know. But like I did mention, we have the same government still making huge investments, still calling out, you know, corporations to take over, you know, the oil and gas sector. But then we have to be more proactive, like I always say, you know, in trying to advance, you know, the options that are available to us. Otherwise, like I did mention, maybe very soon the oil and gas that we cherish so dearly will become souvenir in our parties, because we saw that play out in COVID-19, you know, stranded in the international market and nobody buys from us.
All right. You wanted to follow up. Go ahead, please.
That he was right about the German situation, the hydrogen dependent thing. It's still a small component of the entire space, but this speaks to the German government's interest to reduce diesel and electricity and everything. You know, brilliant one, which we must copy.
Yeah. We
you know,
must, absolutely.
Move on, yeah.
I mean, I'd like to just touch on recovery and obviously commend, you know, these agencies that have been, you know, working tirelessly. NEMA, that's the Niger State Emergency Management Agency, NSEMA, as well as the Nigerian Red Cross Society, and of course, I believe SEMA as well. They've been working tirelessly to, you know, help the communities. In your opinion, what more can be done, and what do you think is the best way to help these communities recover their losses at this point?
Well, losses are categorized into two. We have economic losses, which government can address, you know, but we have non-economic losses, which nobody can address. And we're talking about trauma here. We're talking about threat to livelihood. We're talking about, because there's a difference between jobs and livelihood. Jobs, you know, that you get pays your bills. Livelihood is much more, you know, than that. And these are non-economic losses. And when we are talking to government to be more serious in addressing these issues, we know what we are talking about, you know. So I don't know how recovery for non-economic losses, you know, will look like. I don't know how you want me to settle down in a place that is not mine. I don't know how you want to force, you know, interaction between me and a new environment that is alien to me. I don't know how that, even in LA Galaxy, we've seen people that struggle to settle down, you know, despite resettlement effort by the advanced, you know, government, so to say. Why government, we can force that on government to pay compensation, maybe they're even commensurate, I don't know. But I don't know how government want to fix non-economic losses. And that's why we are saying government should treat this head on. And then I like what you mentioned, when you appreciated those ministries and agencies, because it's good we do that. But like I also said, these are agencies that, you know, are effective post-emergencies, emergency management. But we don't have to get to that point where they have to be active. If our joy as a nation is to see these agencies not active,
that's our joy.
Yes. I mean, that's our joy.
Really?
When we open our tabs, our newspaper, and we don't read about SEMA. I mean, some level of progress for us as a nation. But now the reverse is the case. We don't celebrate. Yes, we understand that they are working, they are proactive, they are solving post-emergency crisis, but that doesn't define us as a people. You know, our strength, our joy should be in their inactivity. And that's why we are saying that agencies that are releasing this data should also demystify this data, working hand in hand with subnational and local government in a way that, you know, information and social orientation goes into the locals. And of course, local mayors, adaptation mayors are advanced to cope this crisis.
Well, all right. Well, on that note, Ms. Olamide, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us on the morning show, and kudos for the good work that you're doing so far.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.